Hey guys, I'm Alex. Tonight we're diving into something small, quiet, and oddly profound. A goat, a rope, and the strange wisdom hiding in the things that seem to hold us back. Welcome to Stillness and Strength Channel, my quiet little corner of the internet where we breathe, reflect, and return to what truly matters. The world may not be yours to control, but your mind, that's your kingdom. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is where you are. I love knowing who's on the other side of this quiet night. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You see it as you walk a goat, tethered loosely to a post in a sunlit field. It chews slowly, its head low, hooves stamping out soft dust. The rope around its neck doesn't seem cruel, not too tight, not cutting into skin. Just there, just holding, a soft, insistent limit. You pause, you're not sure why it pulls you in. There's something in the image that echoes like a dream you don't remember having. A goat, a rope, and a stillness that isn't quite peace. You take a breath. You don't even know if it's your memory or someone else's, but it begins to unfurl something ancient in you. You think of your own limits, the ways you've been tied, maybe not by rope, but by expectation, by time, by identity, by love, by grief, by the gaze of others, or worse, by the gaze you've never dared to meet your own. You think, the goat could break free if it really wanted, could bolt, could fight, but it doesn't. It chews, it glances. It turns in a slow circle but never strays far, and isn't that? You've been turning in circles, haven't you? Returning to the same thoughts, the same old fears, the same fragile dreams. Maybe you think you're roaming, but perhaps you're only rotating around a single post hammered deep into the soil of who you used to be. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "If you are pained by any external thing, it is not this thing that disturbs you, but your judgment about it." So what if the real restraint isn't the rope, but your judgment of it? You stand there watching the goat, and something soft in you starts to open. You remember a moment years ago maybe when you felt bound. Maybe it was a relationship, or a job, or a role everyone praised you for but that quietly suffocated you. You smiled. You played the part, but inside a part of you whispered, "This isn't free, this isn't you." But still you stayed, like the goat. Why? Because sometimes the rope becomes familiar, and what's familiar feels safer than what's true. You wonder, how much of your life has been shaped not by what you've chosen, but by what you've never dared to question. And now you see it clearly. The goat isn't stupid. It knows the rope is there. It simply chooses not to test it anymore. Somewhere along the way, it accepted the circle it could walk. And you've accepted your own, haven't you? The boundaries of what people say you're good at, the limits of what's realistic, the cage of who you think you need to be in order to be loved. But here's the thing, some ropes are necessary, they protect, they ground. But others, they only remain because you've never reached out to feel how far they really go. The Stoics never promised you complete freedom. They promised internal freedom, a mind not ruled by the whims of the world, a heart not governed by impulse or fear. They taught you that some things, many things, are outside your control, but how you move within the rope, that's yours. Seneca said, "A man is as miserable as he thinks he is." And maybe, just maybe, the goat isn't miserable. Maybe it's accepted what is, and found peace inside the circle. But you still wrestle, don't you? You wonder, what would it take to accept your rope, not as punishment, not as weakness, but as a boundary that sharpens your awareness, that gives shape to your movement? Or maybe the better question is, what ropes have you tied yourself with long after someone else stopped holding the other end? You walk on, but the image follows you, a goat, a rope, a still circle of earth. And a question you can't shake, where in your life are you only pretending to be free? The image lingers in your mind, that quiet, sunlit goat, still chewing, still circling. As the path carries you forward, the thought doesn't let go. It nestles into your breath, your step, the soft rhythm of being. You wonder now, How wide is the circle you walk every day? Not literally, but the circle of your habits, your reactions, the thoughts that replay like background music. You wake up, check your phone, brace for the day, fulfill your role, shrink where you're afraid to be seen, puff up where you're afraid to be small. And still you call it freedom, but is it? You remember the way the goat never pulled on the rope, not even once, not while you watched. It just walked, paused, ate, turned back. It never questioned. And you realize something simple but jarring. It didn't need the rope to be shorter than it was, it needed only to believe it was. And that, maybe, is what you're doing too. There's a kind of limit that isn't imposed. It's assumed. You learn it early when you're told who you are, or who you're not, when you're praised for being quiet, or punished for being loud, when they tell you you're sensitive or not enough or too much. And then slowly a rope forms. Not around your neck, no, around your imagination, your worth, your reach. And the most haunting part, you never even feel the knot tighten. Epictetus, once a slave, then a philosopher, taught this over and over. It's not the chains on your body, but the chains on your mind that keep you bound. You think of a time when you didn't apply for something, because you assumed you wouldn't get it. When you didn't say what you really felt because you thought it wouldn't matter. When you didn't walk away, even when you were hurting, because you feared who you'd be without them. And in all those moments, what were you doing? Circling the post. Never testing the length of the rope. It's humbling, isn't it? To think that maybe, just maybe, the walls you feel around you were never built by others. They were just, never questioned. There's an old story of elephants raised in captivity. As babies, they're tied with strong ropes to metal stakes. They pull, they fight, but they're too small to escape. Eventually, they give up. Later, as full-grown adults, they could easily snap the rope, but they don't even try. Why? Because they don't believe they can. And you, with your grown heart and full soul and quietly aching dreams, you still obey the rope tied to a post that may not even be there anymore. So what now? Do you pull? Do you test it? Do you break free? Maybe, maybe not. The Stoics wouldn't say resist every rope. No, that's ego dressed as courage. They would ask you instead, is this limit real or is it imagined? Does it serve you or does it shrink you? Are you circling it out of peace or out of habit? This is where philosophy begins, not in lofty ideas, but in noticing, in daring to see, in gently asking the questions others rush past. So tonight, ask yourself this. What circle do I walk so often I no longer see its edge? Where in my life have I accepted the short rope, not because I must, but because I forgot I could reach further? And maybe, just maybe, what would it feel like to walk right up to the edge and take one more step? You slow down now. The path narrows. Your thoughts begin to stretch like shadows in late afternoon, long, quiet reaching. There's something strange about resistance. You used to think that pulling harder meant strength, that fighting was always noble, that the brave thing was to tug at the rope until it snapped or burned or bled. But what if that's not strength? What if sometimes it's just noise? You think of a moment, maybe recent, maybe long ago, when you resisted something with everything you had, a truth, a goodbye, a silence, a failure. You dug in, you clenched, you didn't let go. And in doing so, you suffered twice, once from the thing itself, and again from your refusal to let it be. The goat, remember, didn't resist. It didn't fight the rope. It moved with it, obeyed its gentle pull, not because it gave up, but because perhaps it knew something you've forgotten, that there is a wisdom in yielding. The Stoics called this apatheia, not apathy, not indifference, but a calm acceptance of things as they are. A freedom from the tyranny of emotional disturbance. You're not a robot. You're allowed to feel. But do you need to suffer every time life doesn't bend your way? Do you need to burn inside every time someone misunderstands you, or when plans fall apart, or when you're not chosen? You think that anger gives you control. But does it? Or does it just tighten the rope around your heart until even your breath feels owned by something outside of you? The goat teaches something in its silence. You can stay calm and still be awake. You can yield and still have dignity. You can accept and still be free. Imagine this, you're standing in a conversation that's going nowhere, words sharp, eyes distant, tension rising. You feel the old impulse: defend, argue, prove, pull. The rope tugs at your neck, but instead of pulling, you pause, you breathe, you soften, not because you lost, but because you chose not to enter the same circle again. That's what Marcus Aurelius meant when he said, "Choose not to be harmed, and you won't feel harmed." It's not about becoming passive, it's about becoming undisturbed. There's a kind of strength that doesn't announce itself. It doesn't flex. It doesn't shout. It doesn't even always move. It's like the mountain that watches the storm without bending. And maybe you have that inside you, you just forgot. The question isn't, should I fight this rope? The deeper question is this resistance making me free, or is it just another form of attachment? Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is stop pulling, to let go of the need to change what is already here, to feel the rope without turning it into a battle. And in that letting go, you find something you never expected, a kind of lightness, a loosening, a space between you and the world's tug. So ask yourself softly tonight, where am I resisting, not out of wisdom but out of habit? What would happen if I stopped pulling, not to give up but to be still? You walk on. The air cools. The silence deepens, not emptiness, but the kind that wraps around you like a soft blanket. And still the image of the goat stays with you. But tonight something shifts. You begin to see it differently, less as a captive, more as a mirror. Because what is freedom really? You've chased it in so many forms. The freedom to choose, the freedom to move, the freedom to say no. But you've also learned something harder, that freedom is not always found in the breaking of rules. Sometimes it lives inside the rules you choose for yourself. You think of the goat again, how its rope defines a circle, but within that circle there is peace, grass, sun, enough. It doesn't run because it doesn't need to, and suddenly a quiet truth slips into your thoughts. Maybe freedom isn't the absence of limitation, but the presence of clarity. How many times have you chased something because it felt wide open, only to get lost in the endlessness of it? How often have you believed that more options meant more power, only to feel paralyzed by the noise? Seneca once warned, "He who is everywhere is nowhere." And you feel the weight of that now. To be free isn't to touch everything. It's to touch what matters deeply. So what if the rope, your rope, isn't a prison? What if it's a perimeter of meaning? You remember a time when your life felt focused. Narrow, yes, but rich. Maybe it was during hardship, or love, or creation. Your world shrank, but your presence grew. The rope pulled tighter, but you came alive inside it. You were anchored, not stuck, not stifled. Anchored. It's a different kind of freedom, not from the world, but within it. The Stoics knew this, that true liberty doesn't begin with external escape. It begins with alignment, with seeing clearly what you can control and letting go of the rest. And isn't that the paradox? That sometimes, to feel boundless, you must accept your bounds. A sailor cannot control the sea, but with a strong rudder they glide. A sculptor begins not with infinite clay, but with a block, and makes meaning from form. So too must you begin, with this moment, this body, this life, this rope. Ask yourself, what limits have I inherited that I can now choose freely as my own? What constraints have shaped me not by force but by focus? And perhaps most tenderly, what have I called restriction that was actually protection? The goat doesn't rage, it doesn't flee, it grazes, it rests, it lives, not beyond the rope, but within it. And maybe, just maybe, so can you. Evening settles around you like a gentle hush. The light softens, the world slows, and in this stillness you begin to notice things you might have missed before, not just outside you but within. A subtle tension in the chest, a thought that keeps returning, a quiet pull towards something unsaid. You think again of the goat not as a creature now but as a symbol, a metaphor, a quiet reflection of your own inner life. Because the rope, real or imagined, only works if the goat believes in the post, only holds if the goat accepts that it cannot go further. And tonight you ask yourself a difficult question. What in your life is holding you back, not because it must, but because you never checked if it still has power? You begin to see them now, invisible fences, They don't shout. They don't mark themselves with signs, but they're there. The belief that you're too old, the fear that you're too late, the idea that you must always be the strong one, the story that says you're unworthy unless you're useful. You've carried these boundaries for so long, they've become part of your inner architecture. You don't notice them anymore. You just move around them. But what if they were never real? What if they were handed to you by people who didn't know better? What if they were whispered into you by a younger version of yourself who was just trying to survive? The Stoics urge you to examine what is true, not what feels true, not what you've been told is true, but what endures under the light of reason. You pause now, take a breath, let it settle. And as you do, you see how much you've mistaken comfort for truth. It's comfortable to stay inside the fence. Comfortable to follow the same thoughts, the same reactions, the same roles. But comfort is not always clarity, and habit is not always wisdom. There's a story from ancient Greece of a philosopher who kept returning to the same fountain every day, always walking the same route. When asked why, he replied, "Because I know it." And maybe that's the reason we all circle the same paths, because we know them, and knowing feels safe. But the Stoic path isn't about safety. It's about truth. And truth often requires discomfort, requires stepping up to the fence, the one in your mind, and asking, is this real? Or is this just familiar? You begin to wonder, what have I never tried, not because I can't, but because I've quietly assumed I shouldn't? What part of myself have I silenced, believing it had no place beyond the post? What would it feel like to stretch my reach, not to break the rope, but to finally know its length? There's no shame in fences, no failure in caution. But there is tragedy in never asking whether you're still truly restrained or just obedient to an outdated fear. The goat doesn't test the edge anymore, but you can, you must. Because the moment you do, even just one step further than usual, you begin to rewrite what's possible, not with force, not with rebellion, but with curiosity. And in that quiet testing, you begin to learn the most important truth of all, that the fence you fear may never have been there at all. The air is cooler now. You feel it along your arms, a reminder that things shift quietly when you're paying attention. That change, real change, doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it arrives like breath, like dusk, and tonight a realization drifts in. You think about the way you hold things, dreams, roles, relationships, expectations. And more than anything, outcomes. There's a particular memory you carry. Maybe you haven't looked at it in a while. Maybe it flickers more than it stands. But it's there. That time you wanted something deeply and it didn't unfold the way you hoped. Maybe it was love that didn't stay, a goal that fell apart, a version of yourself that never quite arrived. You carried it for so long, didn't you? The image of how it should have been. You replayed the scenes, what you could have said, what they should have done. You kept it close, not because it helped, but because letting it go felt like betrayal. But what if letting go is not betrayal? What if it's clarity? What if the rope around your neck isn't tied to someone else's actions, but to your own refusal to loosen your grip? You think again of the goat, tied, still, but free in one beautiful way. It doesn't chase what isn't. It doesn't mourn the other side of the field. It doesn't write stories about where it should have been. It doesn't carry the weight of what if. And that kind of lightness is something you haven't felt in a long time, is it? The Stoics spoke often of this, the grief that comes not from events but from expectations. Epictetus taught, if you want something beyond your control, you will be disappointed. If you try to avoid what is inevitable, you will be anxious. You begin to see how often you've tightened the rope yourself, not by action, but by attachment, to what could have been, to who they were supposed to be, to who you were supposed to be by now. But tonight, gently, you place that image down. You let the loss be real, not resisted. You let the outcome be what it was, not what you needed it to be. And in doing that, something unknots inside you. You begin to understand. Letting go is not failure. It's not passivity. It's precision. It's choosing not to carry the weight of things that no longer exist. There's a moment in every life when you realize you cannot force life to obey your sketches. You cannot draw freedom from trying to control what will always escape you. But you can draw peace from presence, from seeing what is clearly, from staying with it gently, from accepting it fully. So you ask yourself now in the dim light of this evening, what am I still holding on to, not out of hope, but out of habit? What dream do I revisit, not because it lifts me, but because I'm afraid to live without it? And if I let it go, not push it away, but truly let it go, what kind of space would open inside me? The rope doesn't bind only forward movement. It binds backwards too, to the past, to ghosts, to illusions. But you are here, now, breathing, and maybe that's enough. Maybe you don't need the dream to come true to be free. Maybe you only need to let it pass through your hands without resistance, like a breeze, like a sunset, like a story that was never meant to last. Night has fully arrived now. The world hushes itself, windows dim, trees still, and you find yourself somewhere deeper, quieter than before, not in a place, in yourself. You reflect now, not just on the rope, but on how long you've lived with it. And a strange thought rises. What happens when the rope becomes part of you? When it's no longer a separate thing that binds, but something woven into your very sense of identity? You think of all the ways you describe yourself. I'm just not a risk taker. I've always been this way. I'm the kind of person who needs validation. I don't do well with endings, labels, stories, definitions. But where did they come from? Did you choose them? Or were they offered to you by parents, teachers, friends, fear, and over time, absorbed like dye in water? The Stoics remind us that we are not our roles, not our circumstances, not our histories. We are what we do with them. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts." And you, what colors have you soaked in unquestioned? What have you become not because it's true, but because it's familiar? You remember a time when you tried something new, spoke up, dared to say what you really felt, stepped outside the circle, and it felt terrifying, unnatural, like you were breaking some quiet law. But maybe that discomfort wasn't proof that you were wrong. Maybe it was just the sensation of untying a knot that's been there too long. You think again of the goat. Imagine it with the rope gone yet still circling, not because it must, but because it believes it must. That's what happens, isn't it? We internalize the limits. We forget to question them. And then, heartbreakingly, we begin to defend them. We say, this is just who I am. But is it? Or is it who you became to stay safe? There's a term the Stoics rarely used but always implied: liberation of perception. It means seeing again, looking closely at the assumptions you've built your life on, and gently asking, is this mine? Is this helpful? Is this true? Because if it's not, then it's just another rope, woven now not around your neck but into your name. And here's the paradox. You can't remove that kind of rope with force. You have to witness it, sit beside it, understand its roots. Only then will it begin to loosen. So tonight, as the world quiets down, you might ask yourself, what beliefs about myself have I never challenged because they feel like fact? What identity have I clung to even when it costs me peace? And if I let go of that story, who might I become? It's okay not to know the answer. The goat doesn't know either. It simply lives one step, one chew, one breath at a time. And maybe that's enough for tonight. Not to tear the rope off, but to see it. And to whisper gently, you're not me, you're something I've worn. There's a stillness that only comes after truth. Not the loud, victorious kind, but the quiet, sobering kind, the kind that lands in your chest like a pebble dropped into a deep well. Tonight, it settles in you. You've been circling limits, some external, some internal, and the lines are starting to blur. But in that blur, something clear emerges. You cannot escape every boundary, nor should you. Some things will not change no matter how deeply you wish they would. You cannot rewind time. You cannot unsay what's been said. You cannot make someone stay. You cannot stop the body from aging. And yet, there's something profound in realizing what you can't control. Because in that moment, you find peace. Not resignation, not weakness, but peace that rises not from mastery over life, but from alignment with it. The goat, you realize, may not even care about the rope. It doesn't curse it. It doesn't try to bite through it. It simply moves, grazes, pauses, sleeps. It has accepted the post, and in that acceptance it has space to simply be. This is the power of Stoic thought, to teach that peace is not found in the absence of obstacles. It is found in the presence of wisdom. Epictetus, who knew the pain of slavery and loss, said, "Seek not for events to happen as you wish, but wish for events to happen as they do, and your life will flow smoothly." You fought so many ropes, some real, many imagined. But even the real ones, the ropes of circumstance, of loss, of limits, are not your enemy. They're part of the terrain, the weather, the landscape of this human life, and to hate the rope is to hate the shape of the world itself. You sit with that, let it open, let it sting a little, because yes, some things are sad, some things are heavy, some posts will not be pulled from the ground, but you can soften around them. You can loosen your mind's grip, even if the rope remains tied. You can say, "This is here, and I am still free inside it." You think now of someone you've known who carried something they couldn't change, illness, grief, responsibility, and yet somehow they still smiled, still gave, still loved, still found beauty in a sky or a silence. That was not delusion. That was the clarity of acceptance. And it makes you wonder, where in my life am I still fighting what simply is? What would happen if I stopped demanding a different past and chose to embrace the one I have? What could grow if I planted peace at the edge of my own unchangeable truths? The rope doesn't define you. Your response to it does. And when you accept the post, not with defeat but with dignity, you begin to see the entire field differently. Not as a cage, but as a canvas. And maybe, just maybe, your circle is wide enough after all. If you walk it with presence, if you live it with love, if you meet it with grace. The field has grown darker now, not from shadow but from softness. A gentle quiet has settled not just around you but in you. You return for a moment to the goat, the slow circle, the rope, the post, and now you see something else, something small but startling. The goat isn't trying to escape, but it also isn't suffering, it is simply present. And suddenly that feels like a kind of strength. You've spent so much of your life reaching, stretching for more, bracing for loss, resisting stillness. And yet here is a creature, bound by something real and still utterly at peace. Why? Because it does not war with its limits. It moves within them. And that's where your reflection turns tonight, not toward escape, not toward rebellion, but toward freedom inside restraint. You think of someone who once chose to say nothing when everything inside them burned to speak. You remember how strong they seemed, not because they were silent, but because their silence was anchored. It wasn't repression. It was restraint. A quiet choice, a deliberate hold. That's something the Stoics knew well. Freedom isn't always found in motion. Sometimes it is found in stillness, in the ability to not react. You might believe that control means doing what you want, but the wiser truth is that control means not being ruled by what you want. You've seen this, haven't you? In a moment where someone insults you and you feel the burn to strike back. In the quiet ache of loneliness, when you long to reach for a distraction, a comfort, a fix. In the moment of decision, when rushing feels easier than sitting with discomfort. But what if, instead of obeying the urge, you paused? What if in that pause you reclaimed your strength? Marcus Aurelius said, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this and you will find strength." And that power, it begins in the smallest moments. Not the grand battles, but in the space between impulse and action. So tonight, ask yourself, where do I mistake reaction for freedom? Where do I obey every emotion, every craving, every fear as if they were commands, not invitations? And what might I find in the quiet choice not to act? You're learning now that the rope isn't always about what keeps you in. Sometimes it's about what keeps you from rushing out. It becomes a container, a structure, a chosen edge. Think of the artist who chooses only charcoal instead of color and finds new depth in the limitation. Or the poet who writes within a form and discovers precision through constraint. Or the monk who lives inside a cloister, not because they are exiled but because they are devoted. So what if your limits are not walls, but instruments? What if they don't silence you, but help you sing in key? There's a kind of power in choosing less, in simplifying, in staying, in being okay with enough. The goat doesn't seek more. It doesn't wander toward what glitters beyond the fence. It finds peace in the pattern, peace in the familiar circle, peace in knowing that peace doesn't depend on escape. And could you do the same? Could you, for a moment, let stillness be enough? Let quiet be complete. Let your limitations, the ones you've chosen, become not burdens but guides. You breathe into that question. You don't need to answer it yet, but feel it settle in you gently like mist, not as a demand, but as an invitation, to live not larger but deeper, not wider but wiser. The road you've been walking now opens into a quiet clearing, one of those soft, almost forgotten places where the earth feels still and the stars begin to whisper. And in this hush, another truth arrives, not dramatic, not sharp, but sure. Every rope has an edge. You picture the goat again. But this time it walks calmly, steadily, right to the edge of its tether. It doesn't panic, it doesn't pull, it simply steps up to the boundary. It looks, and then it chooses what to do next. That moment, the one at the edge, is where your life keeps returning. Because whether you know it or not, you arrive there every day. When you feel the urge to say more but stop. When you feel the pull to run but stay. When you ache to return to the familiar but remain in the unknown. And you stand there, don't you, right at the edge of what's safe, what's known, what's been allowed. And the question rises, what do you do at the edge? Do you pull out of habit? Do you retreat out of fear? Or do you pause and see? The Stoics didn't worship limits, nor did they deny them. They taught us to examine them, to approach the edge and look not just outward at the barrier, but inward at the one observing it. Because often it's not the rope that matters. It's the story you tell yourself about the rope. Maybe it's, I'll be abandoned if I go further. Or I'll fail if I try. Or I'm too old now. I'm not enough. I don't have permission. And so the rope, however loose, holds you. Not because it's real, but because it feels final. But here's something the goat can't do that you can. You can ask if the rope is still tied. You can test gently, not to break but to know, not to defy but to discern. You remember a moment you did this. You said something you were afraid to say, or reached out when your pride wanted silence, or showed up when everything in you said to disappear. And what happened? Maybe nothing exploded. Maybe the world didn't fall apart. Maybe, quietly, gently, the rope gave way, because it was never fastened to anything. Only a story. Epictetus said, "Don't demand that things happen as you wish, but wish them to happen as they do, and you will go on well." And maybe that's what the edge teaches you. Not to force beyond it, but to meet it with your eyes open. So tonight, ask yourself, where is the edge in my life right now? What do I believe waits beyond it, and who taught me to believe that? And what if I stepped forward not recklessly but curiously just to see? You are not the goat. You have a mind that can question, a will that can choose, a heart that can hold uncertainty. You can live right at the edge, not in fear, not in frenzy, but in presence. And when the moment feels right, you can take one more step, or you can stay, knowing this, that strength is not always found in motion. Sometimes it's found in standing still and no longer mistaking the rope for a prison. The night deepens. It holds you now not tightly but gently, like a hand on your shoulder, like a friend who doesn't need to speak to be felt. And with it comes another kind of seeing, a quieter kind. You begin to wonder, what if the rope was never meant to be fought at all? What if it's not a test, not a punishment, but something else entirely? A teacher. You think of all the ways life has held you back or seemed to. The job that didn't work out, the love that didn't last, the path that closed just as you stepped onto it. At the time they felt like endings, walls, losses. You cursed the rope. But now, years later, you can trace those same moments as turning points, not away from your life but deeper into it. Because each limit taught you something you didn't want to learn: patience, surrender, resilience, perspective. And you realize, some ropes are sacred. They keep you from running before you're ready. They hold you in place just long enough for the lesson to land. They guide you inward when the outer world has nothing left to give. The Stoics called this amor fati the love of fate, not just accepting what happens but loving it, not in a naive way but with deep, sober wisdom, to say, this is not what I wanted, but this too belongs. The goat may not know it, but the rope protects it from wandering into danger, into chaos. And sometimes the same is true for you. You remember a time when you were forced to wait, or to stay, or to end something you thought would last. You thought you were being denied, but looking back you were being redirected, not to a better outcome necessarily, but to a truer version of yourself. That's the work, isn't it? To stop labeling every limit as a loss, because a wise limit, embraced, not resisted, becomes structure, becomes rhythm, becomes peace. You think of a river. It flows not in spite of its banks, but because of them. Remove the banks and it becomes flood. The rope, too, can offer that kind of quiet container, but only if you stop seeing it as the enemy. So tonight, ask yourself, what limitation have I resented that might actually be protecting or shaping me? What have I been pushing against? That's really an invitation to pause. What could grow inside me if I stopped fighting every closed door and trusted that some closures are compassionate? There is dignity in standing still. There is wisdom in waiting. There is depth in accepting that you are not always meant to go further yet. The goat does not despair. It simply lives. And maybe tonight that is enough for you too. Not to be unbound, but to be willing to be bound. For just a while longer, so that something deeper might unfold in the stillness. Tonight the stars feel closer, don't they? Like they're leaning in, listening, waiting, soft as breath. And maybe they are, because something has shifted in you. You no longer see the rope as something to fear, or resent, or escape. You see it now as something that can be understood. And that's where freedom begins, not in breaking the rope, not in running from it, but in asking the one question that few are willing to ask. What is this rope really tied to? Is it tied to an old belief, to an identity that no longer fits, to someone else's expectations passed down like heirlooms, to your fear of being alone or unseen or unremarkable? You pause. Let those questions settle, because they deserve more than quick answers. They deserve silence. The Stoics remind us that philosophy isn't just about answers. It's about sharpening the quality of your questions. You remember now a moment in your life that felt tight, like a rope pulling at your neck, a job that drained you, a relationship that confused you, a role that no longer made sense. You told yourself you had to stay, that you had no choice. But what if that wasn't entirely true? What if the rope wasn't tied to a post, but to a story? A story about what people expect, about what success means, about who you have to be loved. And what happens when you question that story, not with anger, not with blame, but with kindness, with clarity? You begin to see the knot, begin to loosen it, begin to remember that not every rope is made of fact. Some are made of fear. Some are made of loyalty to versions of yourself you've outgrown. Some are made of silence, all the things you've never allowed yourself to say out loud. And when you pull gently on that thread, the whole thing can come undone, not with noise, not with force, but with a single brave moment of honesty. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Very little is needed to make a happy life. It is all within yourself, in your way of thinking." So much of your suffering isn't about what is. It's about what you believe it means. It's about the rope in your mind, the idea that you're behind, that others are ahead, that you're not doing enough, that you've missed your chance. But who tied those thoughts, and when? Because you here now are no longer that child, no longer that lost version of yourself. You can see, you can name, you can choose again. So tonight, ask softly, what story have I mistaken for reality? What rope am I still obeying, even though I now know I could let it go? And most gently of all, what would it feel like to live from truth, not fear, for just one day? You sit with that, let it hum in your bones, not as a command, but as a possibility. The goat doesn't ask these questions, but you can. And that maybe is what separates you from every other creature on earth. The ability to choose. not just how far to go, but what to believe, what to release, and what to quietly, bravely let unravel. You're deeper into the night now, that sacred stretch of time when the world thins, and what is hidden by daylight begins to rise, not to be fixed, not to be solved, but simply to be witnessed. And in this space, you feel something ancient stirring inside you, a quiet pull toward truth, not the kind spoken aloud or posted or praised, but the private kind, the kind only you can feel, and with it, another paradox. Sometimes the rope isn't holding you back, it's holding you together. You think of the moments in your life when everything felt unmoored, a sudden loss, a wave of grief, a rupture in love, in health, in certainty, and what held you then? Maybe it wasn't a person, maybe it wasn't a plan, maybe it was a small practice, a promise to yourself, a few words scribbled in a journal, a morning walk, a breath before answering, a prayer even if you didn't believe in anything. Something small, repeated, tethering, that was your rope. And that's the thing we rarely talk about, that not all ropes are constraints. Some are lifelines, some are rhythm, some are devotion in disguise. The Stoics lived this. They didn't wait for life to be calm to practice calm. They didn't wait for freedom to choose their response. They tied themselves willingly to daily disciplines, meditation, reflection, examination of thought, not because they were trapped, but because they knew. In chaos, the unanchored are swept away. So you ask yourself now, what rope have I chosen that keeps me steady when the world sways? What practice, what principle, what quiet commitment has become the thread I return to? And more than that, am I tending it well? Because not all freedom is found in letting go. Some is found in holding fast. You think of a ship in a storm. The rope is not the enemy. It is what keeps the vessel from breaking apart. And maybe right now in your own life, there is a rope you need to tighten, not loosen. A return to stillness, to structure, to discipline not as punishment but as protection. Epictetus said, "No man is free who is not master of himself." And self-mastery doesn't come from willpower alone. It comes from the humble repetition of right action, from staying tethered to what truly matters. So ask gently, what are the rituals that bring me back to myself? What small act done daily gives shape to my chaos? And am I willing to choose that rope again, even when it's hard, even when it's quiet, even when no one sees? The goat doesn't know why it walks its circle, but you do. You can choose your tethers not out of fear, but out of love, out of wisdom, out of knowing that in a world this wide and wild, you need something steady. And sometimes the rope is not the thing to escape, but the thing to hold. The hush is complete now. Even your thoughts have begun to slow, not silenced, but softened, like waves that no longer crash, just roll. And here at this depth, a final paradox appears. You've spent this journey looking at the rope, the limits, the bindings, the boundaries. But now, something in you wonders, what if I've been the post all along? Not the goat, not the rope, but the one anchoring the whole thing. It's a strange idea at first, but sit with it. Because maybe the thing that keeps you circling is not out there at all. Maybe it's something in you that insists, I must be bound. I must stay in this role. I must earn love. I must prove my worth. Maybe it's not the rope that holds you, but your refusal to untie yourself from yourself. There's a line from Marcus Aurelius that comes to mind. You have power over your mind, not outside events. And if that's true, then you are both the tether and the one who tugs at it, both the jailer and the key, both the story and the silence beneath it. That's the gift of awareness, not to escape life but to meet it clearly. You sit with this now. Feel it stretch inside you, not as guilt but as possibility, because this isn't about blame. It's about awakening. You begin to see how often you've mistaken pain for identity, mistaken effort for love, mistaken scarcity for safety. You thought the rope would keep you small, but maybe it was always inviting you inward. Not to shrink, but to see. That you have always been more than what binds you, more than what hurt you, more than the labels they gave you. You are the one who watches, the one who notices, the one who can choose. So you ask now, if I am the post, what story am I anchoring? What would happen if I loosened my grip, not on others, not on the world, but on myself? And could I love the version of me who is no longer needed but still lingers? There is grief in that, in releasing the roles that once protected you, in outgrowing the armor you built so carefully. But there is also release, like a breath you didn't know you were holding, like light returning through cracks you didn't mean to make. You think again of the goat not grazing now but resting, peaceful, complete. And for the first time, you see, it doesn't need to go anywhere, and neither do you. Because maybe the journey was never about breaking free. Maybe it was about returning gently, finally, to yourself. It's almost morning now. Not quite light, but the dark is thinning. The world is holding its breath between what was and what will be. And you're here, still, present, changed but softly. This whole journey began with a goat, a rope, and a post, a simple image, a humble metaphor. But now that image holds layers, not just about limitation, but about identity and perception and choice. Because the rope is no longer just the thing that holds you back. It's also the thing that teaches you where you are, the thing that reveals what you believe, the thing that invites you to pause, reflect, and reimagine. The Stoics didn't promise a life without ropes. They never sold a version of freedom that meant getting everything you want. What they offered was something sturdier, something quieter, something infinitely more real: inner freedom, the kind that doesn't come from tearing the world apart, but from seeing it clearly, accepting it wholly, responding to it wisely. You think now of everything you've explored over these last 15 parts, the ropes you inherited, the ones you tightened yourself, the ones you chose, the ones you misunderstood. You saw how limitations can be both prison and protection, how silence can be both fear and strength, how stillness can be a kind of movement, and how letting go is sometimes the only real way forward. And above all, you saw that most of the time, it's not the rope that matters. It's how you meet it, with resistance or with reverence, with fear or with focus, with blame or with becoming. You ask one final time, what ropes have shaped me? What have I feared that might actually be leading me inward? And am I ready to walk the circle of my life, not with shame, not with striving, but with open eyes and a steady heart? Because maybe freedom isn't a breaking, it's a remembering, a quiet return